Hello again. Welcome to session 6 of the Storied Life. I am your host, Bob Osborne. If you've been following along to this point, I think we realize together now that stories have depth, that there can be a lot to take notice of in a story. We are learning how much meaning there is in the details, in the bits and pieces. We are seeing how the best stories have a way of yielding more and more. And we're seeing too that there is certainly more in our own personal stories than we maybe at first realized. Perhaps I could say it another way. If we stay with a story, if we take time to really listen to it, look at it closely, I think the mysteries start to open. So what do I mean by the mysteries? I mean the parts we don't fully understand. Because there are always pieces of story and of our own story that we can't quite explain. Mystery. What does it mean then when our story enters a confusing or painful stage, when our well-designed life of clear expectations just doesn't go the way we planned, or when the story, our own story, gets dark or confusing? So I'd like us to consider how at those points we might begin to look for clues. Because mystery does not mean that there is no knowing possible. Mystery means there's not enough knowing yet. I am suggesting then that we look for clues to a kind world. You know, if a story is truthful, if a story is grounded in life as it really is, then it will not be about some direct path to happiness. Good stories, it seems to me, are filled with interesting detours, side excursions. Now, some of us have been charmed into thinking that life is this Monopoly game where the chance card always says, advance directly to go collect your $200. But that's not the way it is it? Truthful, genuine, real story will lead us into dark and challenging spots, or what I want to call reality one. Reality one tells us the world can be deeply challenging, sometimes even cruel. Reality one reminds us that every true story will find some kind of suffering or disappointment, some kind of opposition or loss. But let me tell you about reality two. Reality two is the smiling face of life. And I don't mean luck and I don't mean chance, because I think of reality two rather as a personal presence that intends us good. You might remember in a very first session where I talked about the faith condition. I said that the faith condition was the belief that the story we are part of is going somewhere good, and that there is a personal author who intends this good for us. Faith then is being able to see somehow, even in the rough patch, that there is a kindness operating in the world. Without denying reality one, without denying the troubles, reality two is the sudden awareness that there is a smiling face directed at you, that some kind of goodness is meant for you, and it's not luck, it's blessing. Have you ever noticed then, even a few odd clues here and there, that reality too is in operation? I call these things clues to kindness. And the thing is that they are already there in your story, waiting to be noticed. My first example of this is from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. I finished my third reading of the story this past Christmas. It's just the best, most worthy piece I know of outside of Scripture. And I say that as a serious reader. So you might know that Tolkien was a man of profound Christian faith. He really knew how suffering and hope work together. How in the middle of our sufferings, we can still catch the clues of kindness. You know, as the story moves towards its climax, and you remember this, Frodo and Sam are carrying the ring into the heart of the dark kingdom of Mordor. to cast the ring into the fires of Mount Doom and so destroy it. Most of us know this story, but as Frodo and Sam get closer to finishing their task, they become incredibly weary. They're broken down, they're sad, they're exhausted. We might even say despairing at times. The burden is just so great, especially on Frodo. One night, they stop for the evening and Frodo falls asleep. Sam stays awake. And Tolkien writes this: there, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. Have you ever known a moment when, in the middle of your trouble, you were given some reminder of kindness, even just a clue? Now, don't be too quick here. Think about this one for a moment, when a hopeful clue just popped out against the black night sky. Do you remember it now? And then Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, another one of the great books of the 20th century. Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist. He was Jewish, and he spent 3 years in a Nazi prison camp. Frankl experienced the overwhelming suffering and sadness of the camps. Of course he did. But without trivializing any of that, he also found the possibility of hope in the middle of that wretched place. Frankl actually says it was possible to see the beauty and goodness of the world, even there. And he tells of one night where the prisoners are resting on the floor of their hut after a brutal day of work. They've got soup bowls in their hands, and this fellow prisoner rushes in and tells everyone to follow him outside. And Frankl writes, he says, the whole sky was alive with clouds of ever-changing shapes and colors, from steel blue to blood red. The desolate gray mud huts provided a sharp contrast, while the puddles on the muddy ground reflected the glowing sky. And then, after minutes of moving silence, one prisoner said to another, how beautiful the world could be. They all experienced the sunset as if it were a little clue of kindness. And Frankl writes about working in a trench, and it was winter and it was cold, and he noticed how gray everything was. The sky was gray, the rags they wore were gray, the faces around him looked gray. And as he often did, Frankl said he was carrying on this silent conversation with his wife, struggling to find a reason for being where he was, and there was no good reason, he thought. So he began to protest inside of himself, not out loud, but his heart simply stood up against the hopelessness of what he saw around him. There had to be meaning beyond this, he said. And so he writes, from somewhere I heard a victorious yes in answer to my question of the existence of an ultimate purpose. Wow. And then he tells about this. In that Bavarian forest, down in that trench, in the snow and cold of a very gray day, he suddenly noticed a farmhouse just over the way, as if painted there, he said. And in the dimness of that gray morning, a light came on in the house. And that was all he needed. The words that came to him in that moment were these: et lux in tenebris lucet, and the light shineth in the darkness. Words from the beginning of John's gospel. Just that glimmer of hope, just that little clue, a light coming on when it seemed darkest. Frankl said he continued for hours after that, hacking at the icy ground, digging his hole. And in one sense, nothing had changed. But in another sense, things were different inside of him. And then Frankl said a bird landed on top of the pile of dirt he had just dug from the trench. The bird just sat there looking at him, as if it were some tangible reminder that he was seen and not alone. I'm approaching our scripture story for this session through one aspect of our human experience that we seldom consider. This experience actually has profound effect on us. And I'm talking about how we experience life through human faces. And you might say, what? Well, I'm talking about the faces we see, the faces of parents and spouses and family and workmates and friends and culture, happy or angry faces, faces that light up to see us, faces that turn away from us. And here's what I've come to know, that we depend on faces to help us interpret life. It's on human faces that we look for clues as to what life is all about, whether or not there is any kindness in the world. So let's consider then the story of Jacob, found in Genesis chapters 25 to 33. As we follow the big outline of this story, I would like us to consider, like Sam and Mordor or Viktor Frankl in the camp, to look for clues of kindness. So Jacob is the youngest of two brothers. He's a twin, actually, though not an identical twin. These may be the most unidentical twins ever born, Jacob and Esau. Esau was the firstborn by mere minutes. Jacob followed his older brother, holding on to his heel as if to say, don't forget about me. And there we have Jacob in a nutshell, this striving, trying so hard, because in that world, the oldest held the rights of inheritance. And Jacob, born second, is saying, me too, I want to live under the blessing of the firstborn. So Jacob grows up thinking he has to deceive, manipulate to get what he wants, what he needs. From this point then, we'll follow the story through faces. First, there is the face of Jacob's father, Isaac, which is apparently turned toward Jacob's older brother, Esau, the oldest in the heir. When Isaac is old and blind, Jacob pretends to be his brother in order to steal his father's blessing. So think about how sad that is, that one feels they have to steal a blessing from a father who can't see them and thinks you are someone else. And then when Jacob's brother Esau finds out what Jacob has done, he threatens to kill him, and Jacob runs away. So there's another face, his brother's angry face. Jacob runs to a far country to find his uncle Laban, and there he meets Rachel, Laban's daughter, who we are told has a beautiful face. And Jacob is smitten, promising Laban he will work for 7 years to earn her hand in marriage. But on the night of the wedding, Laban deceives Jacob, giving him instead his daughter Leah, who is not as lovely as her sister. And Jacob must work another 7 years to earn Rachel. So don't try to figure out the reasonableness of all of this. It's just another messy family story. But there is this continual play on the theme of the face, isn't there? So life goes on for a while. And then something begins to change between Jacob and Laban. Here's what the text says. Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. And if we make this a more literal rendering of the Hebrew, it would say this: Jacob saw the face of Laban, and it was no longer with him. The point here is obvious, I think. The clues of life are literally all over the face, and I think this is a truth we know. So Jacob knows it's time to go home. He's a grown man, he has a family, and it's all over Laban's face that he's no longer welcome there. So Jacob will leave, but now, what about the past? What about the faces back home? Jacob sends a message ahead to his brother Esau. He's coming back. He's coming back that way. And his message says he hopes to find favor in his brother's eyes. All he hears back is that his brother is coming now to meet him, and he has 400 men with him. How would you hear that piece of news? Well, everything now, it seems, comes to a head in Jacob's life. All of the root issues, all of the long search to be seen, to be blessed, it just all floods back for him. And if we again literalize the Hebrew text, Jacob says to himself, about his brother Esau, I will pacify his face with the presence I am sending ahead. And after, when I see his face, it may be that he will lift up my face. Jacob is trying again, as he always has, to shape the outcome. Always the schemer, always working his plan. The next Jacob will see his brother will be the first time since he ran away, so it's a big moment. Jacob sends all his family and everything he owns ahead of him, and he is left alone for the night. And something happens that is surely hard to explain or define. It's a mysterious moment in the biblical story. It's a mysterious presence that comes in the night, and Jacob wrestles with a man. And we say, who is this man? What does it mean that Jacob wrestles with a man through the night? Because all his life, Jacob has been a wrestler, hasn't he? He's wrestled with his father and his brother and his uncle Laban. He's always trying to shape the outcome of things, always trying to get each relationship to work for his benefit. And it seems clear to me that Jacob was a man who desperately needed something. So here's the story, and it's a very mysterious moment in the Bible. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. And then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." And Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." We ask, who is this mysterious presence? We're only given clues here. He has the power to bless Jacob. He has the right to rename him. And there's this too, that when the night of wrestling was done, Jacob knew he had seen the face of God. All his life he has been reading faces, and that night he saw something he called the face of God. It was the singular clue that changed everything about how Jacob understood his life, who he was, and where his story was going. He saw a face that saw him, warts and all, a face that was for him, a face that was with him. This he could see somehow. Was this a mystical experience that Jacob had, like a dream? Maybe we should ask this. Was there any practical outcome to Jacob's experience? So I'll let you judge that by how this part of Jacob's story concludes. Because as the day dawned then, after the night of wrestling, Jacob looks up, and there is Esau coming with his hundreds of men. And Jacob is afraid. He braces himself. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. My goodness, what a surprise. You weren't expecting that, were you? Jacob wasn't. Esau said, "What's the meaning of all these flocks you sent on ahead?" And Jacob said, "So that you will look on me with grace." And Esau said, "I have all I need." And Jacob said, "Please, brother, accept this gift from me, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably." To see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you show me kindness. I am sure that from then on, every time Jacob saw an open, accepting, gracious, loving face, a face that was happy to see him, he was reminded that that was a clue to the face of God. Is there kindness in the world? Well, we can look for clues, and they are in every story. Those clues to kindness are in your story. As for Jacob, what he somehow saw in that mysterious night of wrestling, he saw the next day on his brother's face. we end these sessions with a few questions so that you can push deeper into these stories and into your own story. I'm not always sure what might strike a person from what is said, so if there's anything you have heard in this talk, anything that has meant something to you, maybe you can go back to that point in this video and form your own question. Without waiting for my questions, perhaps there is a question you know you're being faced with right now in your life, something that has emerged. You might want to write down your own question before we begin, but while you ponder that, here are a few more possibilities. As we talked about that hopeful sign that emerged in the dark moment in The Lord of the Rings, I already asked you there if you have ever suddenly became aware of a grace or a sign of hope or some special help, some star against the black sky, right in the middle of the difficulty. Can you recall anything like that in your story? Secondly, can you picture the face of your parents or other significant persons in your life? What is the state of the faces in your life? And can you name a face of acceptance in your life, a face that welcomed you, that beamed happiness to see you, that gave you all the evidence visually that you were loved and wanted? And thirdly, in the same way that I asked in session 1 for a handful of scenes to tell your story, perhaps you have a handful of clues from your story that point in a hopeful direction. They may be big things or small things, but these moments and signs are important to you. What are they? And maybe we could say, why do I even call them clues? And finally, do you have a favorite story? What makes it so special for you? How do the themes of suffering and hope play off each other in that story? One last thought. I would like you to hear the ancient blessing that the priests of Israel were to say over the people, over Jacob's tribe, we could say. I'll put it on screen for you, but I'd really like you to listen. So listen closely. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Do you see how the face plays into this blessing? If you are then confronted with reality 1, remember what that is, the face of trouble. Please remember to look also for reality 2, the face of goodness, the face of kindness and hope. Look for those stars in the night sky, for those lights that suddenly appear in the grayest of days. Especially, look for the blessing of the shining face. I suspect all these clues to kindness are present in your story, so I invite you to look for them. Until next time, so long.